"My husband owns this building," said the maid. The manager laughed but fainted when Emily Thompson held her trembling hands as manager Derek continued shouting in front of all the employees. The silver tray had slipped from her hands when he pushed it, and now the expensive glasses were scattered across the marble floor. "You incompetent woman!" Derek yelled, his face red with anger. 3 years working here, and you still haven't learned to hold a tray properly? I'll fire you today." The other employees lowered their heads, pretending not to see the scene. Emily felt tears burning her eyes, but she couldn't cry. Not in front of everyone. Not when she still needed to keep her secret. "Please, Mr. Derek," she whispered. "It was an accident. It won't happen again." "Accident?" He laughed scornfully. "You're an accident. A 30-year-old woman who can't even clean a room properly. Just look at you, with that pitiful face. Nobody will ever want you anyway." The words hurt more than any slap. Emily swallowed her tears and lowered her head even further. If only she could tell the truth. If only she could reveal who she really was. But she couldn't. Not yet. "Do you know what you are?" Derek continued, bringing his face close to hers. "A failure. A woman with no future, no family, nothing. That's why you work as a maid at 30. It was then that something inside Emily broke. 3 years enduring those humiliations. 3 years pretending to be someone else. 3 years suffering in silence while watching from afar the man she loved most in the world, without even being able to touch him. "My husband owns this building," she whispered, so low that almost no one heard. Derek stopped shouting and tilted his head with a confused expression. "What did you say?" "I said my husband owns this building," repeated Emily, a little louder this time. Silence took over the hotel lobby. The employees raised their heads, curious. The receptionist, Jessica, stopped answering the phone. Even the passing guests stopped to listen. Derek started to laugh. A loud, cruel laugh that echoed off the marble walls of the Sunset Bay Hotel. "Did you hear that, everyone?" he shouted to all. "The crazy maid says her husband owns the hotel." He continued laughing until tears streamed down his face. "What a joke. A woman like you, married to a millionaire? You probably don't even have a proper education." It was at that moment that the main doors opened. A tall man with dark hair and an impeccable suit entered the lobby. His firm steps echoed on the floor, and his immediate presence commanded respect. Several employees bowed slightly in greeting. Michael Reynolds walked with the same elegance as always, but there had been something different in his eyes lately. A light that hadn't been there in previous years, an awareness that was gradually returning. His gaze swept the lobby until it stopped at Emily. As had been happening in recent months, he felt that inexplicable connection, that warmth in his chest that he couldn't explain, that desire to protect her that came out of nowhere. "Emily," he said, and his voice was like thunder in the silence of the lobby. Derek turned slowly, the smile dying on his face. His eyes widened when he saw Michael Reynolds there, looking directly at the maid. "Mr. Reynolds," Derek stammered, "I didn't know you were arriving today." Michael didn't take his eyes off Emily. There was something in those brown eyes of hers, something that stirred his soul in a way he didn't fully understand, but felt was genuine. "What's happening here?" asked Michael, noticing the tears in Emily's eyes and Derek's defensive posture. "Nothing important, Mr. Reynolds," Derek replied quickly. "Just a clumsy employee who was making up stories." "She said that," he laughed nervously, "that her husband owns the building. Can you imagine the madness?" Michael felt something strange happen in his mind, a quick image like a flash. Emily in a white dress, Emily smiling at him, Emily saying, "I accept." He shook his head, confused by those images that appeared out of nowhere. "And what did you say to her?" asked Michael in a more serious voice. I was explaining that employees can't make up stories during work hours," lied Derek, breaking into a cold sweat. Michael walked over to Emily. With each step, new images appeared in his mind. Emily cooking, Emily tending to flowers, Emily sleeping beside him, all very confusing, but at the same time familiar. "Emily," he said softly, "are you all right?" She nodded, unable to speak. Having Michael so close, smelling his scent, hearing his voice, it was a mix of happiness and pain that almost killed her. "Mr. Reynolds," interrupted Derek, desperate. "The lady is disturbing the other employees. Perhaps it would be better if she returned to work." Michael turned to Derek, and for the first time in a long time his eyes shone with an authority he himself didn't know where it came from. "No one is going back to work until I understand what happened here," he said firmly. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out." Now continuing. Jessica, the receptionist, watched everything with a racing heart. She had discovered something 3 weeks ago that would change everything, but she didn't know if she should tell. In the archive room, while looking for old documents, she found a folder with photos from Michael Reynolds' wedding, and in the photo, radiant in white beside him, was Emily. At first, Jessica thought it was a coincidence. Maybe it was just someone who looked like her. But the more she watched Emily working, the more certain she became. The way she knew every corner of the hotel, how she knew exactly where all the rooms were, how her eyes shone when Michael appeared. And now, seeing the scene unfold before her eyes, Jessica felt she needed to do something. But what? Tell Michael? Tell Derek? Or keep the secret that Emily was obviously guarding for some reason? Michael kept looking at Emily with that confused expression she knew so well. It was the same expression he had when he woke up in the hospital 3 years ago, asking who all those people around him were. The same expression when the doctors explained about the memory loss. "Have you worked here long, Emily?" asked Michael. 3 years, Mr. Reynolds," she replied, avoiding his gaze. 3 years, he repeated thoughtfully. There was something about that number that bothered him. Why did 3 years seem important? Derek realized he was losing control of the situation and tried to regain authority. "Mr. Reynolds, with all due respect, but Mrs. Emily has been causing several problems lately. Perhaps it would be better to find someone else for her position." "What kind of problems?" asked Michael, without taking his eyes off Emily. "Well," Derek stammered, "she's slow at cleaning the rooms. And today she broke the hotel's expensive china. Besides, she keeps making up stories about being married to important people." "Did she specifically say she was married to me?" asked Michael. The silence that followed was deafening. All the employees held their breath. Jessica brought her hand to her heart. Emily closed her eyes, preparing for the worst. "No, not exactly that, Mr. Reynolds," lied Derek. "She only said her husband owned the building. I interpreted it as a fantasy of hers." Michael nodded slowly, but he still had that feeling he was missing something important. Something that was right in front of him, but that he couldn't see. "Emily," he said, "can you show me how you clean the rooms?" The question took everyone by surprise. Derek almost choked. "Mr. Reynolds," he said quickly, "you don't need to worry about operational details. I want her to show me," Michael interrupted firmly. Emily nodded timidly and began walking toward the elevators. Michael followed her, leaving Derek red with anger in the lobby. As they rode up in the elevator, Michael watched Emily discreetly. There was something about the way she moved, how she breathed, how she existed in the same space as him, that stirred a disturbing familiarity. "Emily," he said when they reached the 15th floor, "can I ask you a personal question?" She swallowed hard. "Of course, Mr. Reynolds." "Have you ever been married?" The question hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. She stopped in the middle of the hallway, trying to control the tears that threatened to fall. "Why do you ask that, Mr. Reynolds?" "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I get the impression that you carry a great sadness, a sadness of someone who has lost something very important." Emily opened the door to the presidential suite, the one she always cleaned with extra care because it was Michael's favorite before the accident. It was where they had spent their honeymoon. It was where he always said he felt most like himself. "I did lose my husband, yes," she said, entering the room. "I'm sorry," said Michael, genuinely moved. "Was it recent?" Emily began to arrange the pillows on the bed, the ones she herself had chosen years ago. "It's been 3 years," she murmured. Michael stopped walking. 3 years again. Why wouldn't that number leave his head? What happened to him? Emily felt the tears finally begin to flow. How could she explain that her husband was right there in front of her, alive, breathing, talking to her, but at the same time was lost forever? He was gone in an accident, she said, which wasn't a lie. The Michael she knew had truly been gone since that day. A car accident? Asked Michael, feeling a strange pain in his chest. Emily nodded, unable to speak. Michael approached her and, without thinking, placed his hand on Emily's shoulder. The touch was like an electric shock for both of them. Emily turned, and for a moment their eyes met in a way that transcended time and memory. "Emily," whispered Michael, "I am so sorry for your loss, but I'm sure he would want you to be happy." "How can you be sure?" she asked, her voice choked. "Because any man who had you as a wife would be crazy not to want your happiness above all else." At that moment, something happened in Michael's mind, a quick memory, like a film playing at high speed. He saw himself saying those exact words to someone, somewhere, sometime. "Michael," murmured Emily, forgetting to use his last name. "What did you say?" Emily realized her mistake and turned pale. I said Mr. Reynolds." "No," said Michael, moving closer. "You called me Michael. Only my family calls me Michael." The silence between them was charged with tension. Emily felt she was on the edge of a cliff. One word, one gesture, and everything she had built over the last 3 years would crumble. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to be disrespectful." Michael studied her for a long moment. There were secrets in those eyes, secrets he felt he should know. "Emily," he said slowly, "why do I feel like we've met before?" Before she could answer, the suite door burst open violently. Derek entered like a hurricane, his face red and sweating. "Mr. Reynolds," he shouted, "I need to speak with you urgently." "I'm busy," replied Michael, irritated by the interruption. "It's about her," said Derek, pointing at Emily. "I discovered something terrible. She's lying to you." Michael turned completely toward Derek, with a dangerous expression. "Explain what you mean." Derek took a deep breath, seeing the opportunity to get rid of Emily once and for all. "She's not a widow, Mr. Reynolds. I investigated. Emily Thompson was never married. She made up this whole story to gain sympathy and keep her job." Emily felt the world spinning around her. Technically, Derek was right. On paper, she did appear as single because she had changed her marital status back when Michael lost his memory, following the lawyer's guidance to protect his assets. "Is it true?" asked Michael, looking directly at her. Emily opened her mouth, but no sound came out. How to explain such a complex situation? How to say that on paper she was single, but in her heart she was still married? It's complicated," she murmured. "Complicated," laughed Derek. "Lying is complicated indeed. Mr. Reynolds, this woman is a fraud. She took advantage of your kindness and invented a sob story to manipulate you." Michael felt anger growing inside him, not at Emily but at Derek. There was something about how this man spoke to her that made him furious. "Get out," said Michael coldly. "What?" asked Derek, confused. "I said get out. Now." "But Mr. Reynolds—" "Get out!" shouted Michael, with an authority that made Derek step back. Derek ran out of the suite, leaving Michael and Emily alone again. Michael turned to Emily, who was trembling. "Emily," he said gently, "I want you to tell me the truth. The whole truth." Emily looked into his eyes and saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. Understanding. Patience. Love. "Michael," she said, using his name again, "the truth is much more complex than you might imagine. Try to explain it to me." Emily took a deep breath. Maybe it was time. Maybe 3 years of suffering were enough. Maybe it was time to risk everything. "Would you like to sit?" she asked. Michael nodded and sat in the armchair that had always been his favorite. Emily sat on the bed, keeping a safe distance. "3 years ago," she began, "I was married to a wonderful man. We loved each other very much. We were happy." Michael watched her with full attention. But then a terrible accident happened, a car crash that changed everything. "He?" asked Michael softly. "He didn't lose his life," said Emily quickly. But he lost something perhaps even more important. He lost his memory, lost who he was, lost us. Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. The doctors said forcing memories could be harmful, that he needed to recover them naturally, or he might never fully recover. "And you?" asked Michael. "What happened to you?" "I made the most difficult decision of my life," said Emily, tears streaming down. "I decided to stay close to him, but without pressure, without forcing. I let the doctors and his family believe it would be better for him to start a new life, without the painful memories." Michael was beginning to understand, but still couldn't fully process it. "So you—" "I got a job at the place where he spent most of his time, where he felt most comfortable, and I stayed there caring for him from a distance, watching him get better, hoping that one day he would remember." "Emily," said Michael, his voice trembling. "That man, what was his name?" Emily looked into his eyes and saw that he already knew the answer. "Michael Reynolds." The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Michael felt as if the world were moving in slow motion. Images began to appear in his mind with more clarity. Emily laughing, Emily crying, Emily saying she loved him, Emily walking toward the altar. "You," he whispered. "You are—" "Your wife," Emily completed. "Or I was. I don't know how to define myself anymore." Michael rose from the armchair as if he'd been shocked. He began pacing back and forth, his hands on his head. "3 years," he said. 3 years you worked as a maid. 3 years you served me coffee, cleaned my rooms, and I didn't know." "You couldn't have known," Emily said quickly. "That's exactly what I wanted, for you not to feel pressured." "But you were suffering," said Michael, stopping in front of her. "All that time you were suffering, and I didn't know." "It doesn't matter," said Emily. "What matters is that you're well. You're healthy, you have a good life, and you?" interrupted Michael. "What kind of life do you have? Working as a maid? Being humiliated by that awful man? Pretending to be someone else?" "It's the life I chose," Emily said simply. Michael looked at her and felt a wave of emotions he couldn't control. Anger at himself for not remembering, sadness for all the suffering she had endured, and something else, something that was growing in his chest like a fire. "Emily," he said, moving closer, "I need to ask you something very important." "What?" "Do you still love me?" The question caught Emily off guard. She had prepared for many reactions, but not for this one. "Michael." "Please," he said, "be honest with me. After 3 years of seeing me every day, knowing I didn't remember you, knowing you could be living your own life instead of taking care of me, do you still love me?" Emily looked at him and saw the boy he was when they met. She saw the man he had become. She saw the future they could have together. "I never stopped loving you," she said. "Not for a second. Even when it was impossible. Even when it hurt too much. Even when I thought you would never look at me the way you did before." Michael felt something open in his chest, as if a dam had broken. Memories began to flow. The first date, the first kiss, the marriage proposal, the happiness they felt when they discovered they were going to build a life together. "Emily," he said with tears in his eyes, "I remember." "What?" she asked, hardly daring to hope. "You, us, everything." At that moment the door opened again. But this time it wasn't Derek. It was an elegant lady of about 60, with greying hair and kind eyes. "Michael," she said, stopping at the door upon seeing the scene. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were—" "Mother," said Michael, confused. "What are you doing here?" Mrs. Patricia Reynolds looked at Emily, and her eyes filled with tears. "Emily, my dear," she said, rushing to embrace her daughter-in-law. "It's been so long." Michael watched the scene in total confusion. "You know each other?" Mrs. Patricia pulled away from Emily and looked at her son. "Michael," she said carefully, "Emily is your wife." "I know," said Michael. "She just told me." "You remember?" I'm starting to remember many things. Mrs. Patricia sighed with relief and sat in the armchair. Emily, she said, you don't have to pretend anymore. He's remembering. Mother, said Michael, you knew. All this time you knew she was working here. Mrs. Patricia nodded. I found out a few months ago. I came to visit you here at the hotel and recognized her immediately. I spoke with her, and she explained everything to me. And you didn't tell me? She asked me not to tell, said Mrs. Patricia, and I understood her reason. You needed to remember on your own, or the memories might not be real. Michael looked at Emily with an admiration that grew by the minute. You gave up everything, he said. Your life, your identity, your happiness, all for me. It wasn't a sacrifice, said Emily. It was love. At that moment they heard a noise in the hallway, loud voices, an argument. The door opened once again, and Derek entered accompanied by 2 security guards. Mr. Reynolds, said Derek with a fake smile, I brought security to escort her out. We discovered she's a dangerous imposter. Michael stood up slowly, and for the first time in 3 years, Emily saw in him the complete authority he possessed before the accident. Derek, said Michael in a voice that made everyone in the room fall silent, you're fired. What? Stammered Derek. You're fired, and more than that, you will be sued for moral harassment, humiliation, and mistreatment of my wife. Your wife? Derek turned pale. Emily Reynolds, said Michael, walking to her and taking her hand. My wife for 5 years, working at this hotel for 3 years, being mistreated by you all this time. Derek looked around, as if searching for an exit. The security guards, realizing the situation, stepped away from him. But Mr. Reynolds, Derek tried, I didn't know. If I had known she was... The problem isn't that you didn't know who she was, interrupted Michael. The problem is how you treat people regardless of who they are. No employee at this hotel should be treated the way you treated Emily. Derek realized he had lost everything. His job, his reputation, his arrogance, everything had crumbled in a matter of minutes. Security, said Michael. Escort Mr. Derek out of the building and make sure he never sets foot here again. After Derek was removed, Michael turned to Emily. We have a lot to talk about, he said. I know, she replied. But first, said Michael, smiling for the first time in a long while, I have 3 years of kisses to make up for. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Emily felt her heart race as Michael approached. For 3 long years, she had dreamed of this moment. 3 years imagining what it would be like to have him back, completely, body and soul. Michael, she whispered, are you sure you want this? Maybe you need more time to process everything. Emily, he said, placing his hands on her face. I lost 3 years of our life because of an accident. I won't lose another minute because of fear. When their lips met, it was as if the whole world realigned itself. Mrs. Patricia discreetly left the suite, leaving the couple alone. They kissed with the intensity of those who had been separated by a war, with the tenderness of those meeting for the first time, with the familiarity of those who had never truly been apart. I missed you every day, murmured Michael against her lips. You couldn't have missed me, said Emily, smiling through tears. You didn't remember me. My soul remembered, he said. That's why I always felt empty. That's why I always felt like something was missing. It was you. It was always you. They held each other for a long time, trying to make up for 3 years of lost affection. But Michael knew there was much more than kisses and hugs to recover. Emily, he said, pulling back a little to look her in the eyes. I need to know everything. Everything that happened in these 3 years. How did you get the job here? How did you endure being mistreated? Why did you never give up? Emily took a deep breath. It was time to tell the whole truth. After your accident, she began, the doctors said you had lost about 6 years of memory. You remembered your childhood, your teenage years, college, but you didn't remember the last few years. You didn't remember me, our marriage, anything. Michael nodded, encouraging her to continue. Your mother and your brothers wanted to tell me about the situation, but the doctors were very clear. They said forcing memories could cause permanent damage, that you needed to recover naturally in your own time. And they thought it would be better if I didn't know about you. Not exactly, said Emily. They asked me what I wanted to do, if I wanted to wait for you to recover, knowing that it might never happen completely, or if I preferred to move on with my life. And you chose to wait. I chose more than wait, said Emily. I chose to stay close to you, but in a way that wouldn't pressure you. You used to come to the hotel even without remembering you were the owner. You said you felt good here, that you liked the atmosphere. And you got the job as a maid. Your mother helped me, Emily admitted. She falsified some documents so I could work here without raising suspicions. We changed my last name back to Thompson, made up a work history, and I started working. Michael shook his head, impressed. And Derek, how did he become manager? He already worked here when I started, said Emily, but he was just a cleaning supervisor. When the previous manager retired, you promoted him. You didn't remember the behavioral problems he had before the accident. What problems? Derek was always rude to the staff, Emily explained, but before the accident you knew about it and kept him in check. After you lost your memory, he saw an opportunity to move up and completely changed his behavior when you were around. He pretended to be someone else with me? Completely, confirmed Emily. With me and the other employees, he was a tyrant. With you, he was the model employee. And since you didn't remember what he was really like, you ended up believing the facade. Michael felt a wave of guilt. Emily, forgive me. If I had known— You couldn't have known, she said quickly, and I didn't want you to know. I was afraid that if you found out who I was, the memories would come back forced, and that would hurt you. So you endured 3 years of mistreatment to protect me. I would endure 30 if necessary. Michael kissed her again, with an intensity that spoke more than any words. Never again, he said. You will never go through that again. I will never let anyone mistreat you again. Michael, said Emily softly, I need to tell you one more thing. Something that will be hard to hear. Michael's heart raced. What else had happened in those 3 years? What? Derek wasn't just rude, said Emily. He was stealing from the hotel. A lot of money. How do you know that? Because I cleaned his office, Emily explained. And I saw the documents. Fake invoices, ghost vendors, inflated accounts. He's been embezzling money for over 2 years. Michael stood up abruptly. How much money? Millions, Emily said quietly. I took pictures of some documents when I could. You have proof? Emily nodded. Hidden in my apartment. I didn't know what to do with them. I couldn't come to you directly, and I had no one else to turn to. Michael began to pace back and forth, processing the information. Emily, he said, you saved this hotel. If it weren't for you, Derek would have stolen everything. I just wanted to protect what was yours, she said simply. Michael stopped in front of her and looked at her with an admiration that went beyond love. You are amazing, he said. All these years I thought I was alone, that I had lost everything in the accident. But in truth, I had a guardian angel watching over me. I'm no angel, said Emily, blushing. I'm just a woman who loves her husband. At that moment, they heard a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Patricia entered again, but this time she wasn't alone. With her was a young woman of about 25, with red hair and bright green eyes. Michael, said Mrs. Patricia, there's someone I want you to meet, or rather recognize. Michael looked at the young woman but felt no familiarity. Mother, This is Jessica, said Mrs. Patricia, the receptionist, but she's also much more than that. Jessica approached timidly. Mr. Reynolds, she said, I found out about Mrs. Emily a few weeks ago, and since then I've been helping your mother protect her from Derek. How so? Whenever Derek was going to do something very cruel to her, I created distractions, explained Jessica. I'd call you, make up problems at the front desk, anything to interrupt. Michael looked at Emily, who nodded in confirmation. Jessica helped me a lot, said Emily, especially on the most difficult days. Why did you do this? Asked Michael. Because love is the rarest and most precious thing in the world, said Jessica, and when we see true love, we have to protect it. Mrs. Patricia approached her son. "Michael," she said, "you have people who love you very much. People who spent 3 years protecting you and protecting your love. I think it's time for you to repay them." Michael understood the message. It was time to stop being a victim of circumstances and take control of his life. "Mother," he said, "call an emergency meeting with all the directors and lawyers now." "Now?" asked Mrs. Patricia. "It's almost 7 in the evening." "Now," confirmed Michael, "we have a lot to resolve. And first," he said, taking Emily's hand, "we're going to make it official that my wife will return to the place that was always hers." "What place?" asked Emily, confused. "By my side," said Michael, "as co-owner of this hotel and of my life." 2 hours later, the hotel's meeting room was full. All the directors, lawyers, and senior staff were present. Emily was sitting next to Michael, wearing a dress that Mrs. Patricia had brought from home. Michael stood up and looked at everyone present. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "over the past 3 years, because of the consequences of my accident, many things have changed in this hotel, some for the better, others for the worse. Today, I'm going to correct the mistakes and strengthen what's right." He paused and looked at Emily. "First," Michael continued, "I want to officially introduce my wife, Emily Reynolds. For medical reasons related to my accident, she couldn't publicly take her place for the past 3 years, but from now on, she will be recognized as co-owner and co-director of all operations of this hotel." Murmurs of surprise spread through the room. Some employees who knew Emily as a maid couldn't believe what they were hearing. "Second," said Michael, "we have discovered evidence of significant embezzlement by the former manager, Derek Wilson. The evidence will be handed over to the proper authorities, and all misappropriated funds will be recovered." The lawyers began taking notes quickly. "Third," Michael continued, "starting tomorrow, we will implement new employee treatment policies. Any form of harassment, humiliation, or mistreatment will result in immediate dismissal and legal action." Spontaneous applause began to break out around the room. "And lastly," said Michael, "I want to publicly apologize to all employees who were mistreated during my absence, especially to those who were mistreated right in front of me, without me realizing what was happening." A cleaning staff member stood up. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, "Mrs. Emily was always good to all of us. Even though she was mistreated by Derek, she always found a way to help us. She deserves our gratitude, not apologies." Other employees began to stand up and applaud. Within minutes, the entire room was on their feet, applauding Emily. She was too emotional to speak, but Michael stood up beside her. "My wife," he said, "spent 3 years sacrificing her own happiness to take care of me and all of you. The least we can do now is build an environment where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." After the meeting, Michael and Emily walked hand in hand through the hotel corridors. Now she was no longer cleaning the rooms. Now she was by his side, as she always should have been. "Michael," she said, "I still can't believe this is real." "It is real," he said, stopping and turning to her. "We are real. Our love is real, and we will never be apart again." "But what if your memories don't come back completely? What if you only remember some things?" Michael smiled and kissed her gently. "Emily," he said, "even if I never recovered any memories, I would fall in love with you again every single day. Because you are amazing. Because you are brave. Because you are loyal. Because you are everything good in the world. I love you so much," she said, hugging him. "And I love you more," he replied. They were interrupted by Jessica, who approached timidly. "Excuse me," she said. "Mrs. Reynolds, may I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course," said Emily. "And please call me Emily." "Emily," said Jessica, smiling, "I wanted to give you something." She held out a small box. "What is it?" asked Emily. "Open it," said Jessica. Emily opened the little box and saw a ring, her engagement ring. The ring she had taken off 3 years ago when she decided to work as a maid. "How did you—" began Emily. "Your mother-in-law gave it to me," explained Jessica. "She said you had left it with her when you started working here. She asked me to return it when the time was right." Michael took the ring from the box. "May I?" he asked. Emily held out her hand, trembling with emotion. "Emily Reynolds," said Michael, placing the ring on her finger. "Will you be my wife? Again?" "I will," she said through tears of joy, "today and always." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just getting started. Now, continuing. But life wouldn't be simple from that moment on. In the days that followed, Michael discovered that the problems at the hotel were even bigger than he had imagined. Derek hadn't just embezzled money. He had created a complex web of corruption that involved suppliers, employees from other shifts, and even some regular guests. "The numbers don't add up," said the head accountant, Robert, during a meeting the next morning. "The loss is much greater than we initially thought." Michael felt immense pressure on his shoulders. He had just gotten his wife and his memory back, and now he found out that his business was on the verge of bankruptcy. "How much time do we have?" he asked. "If we can't recover at least 70% of the embezzled funds in the next 3 months," said Robert, "we'll have to sell the hotel to pay the debts." Emily, who was sitting next to Michael, took his hand. "We'll manage," she said firmly. "Emily," said Michael, "you don't understand. If we lose the hotel, we lose everything. Our home, our livelihood, everything." "So what?" she said, surprising him. "Michael, I spent 3 years cleaning bathrooms and being humiliated. Do you think having money or not makes a difference to me? What matters is that we're together." Emily's words moved everyone in the room, but Michael knew the problem was more serious than it seemed. "Robert," he said, "I need to see all the documents, everything. I want to understand exactly how Derek managed to embezzle so much money without anyone noticing." "Mr. Reynolds," said Robert hesitantly, "there's something you need to know. Derek didn't do this alone." Michael felt a chill in his stomach. "What do you mean?" "Someone on the inside was helping him. Someone with access to the system codes, the passwords, the confidential documents." "Who?" Robert looked around the room, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm not sure yet," he said, "but I'll find out." After the meeting, Michael and Emily were alone in the office. "Michael," said Emily, "I need to tell you something. Something I discovered but didn't know if I should mention." "What is it?" "Over the last few months, I noticed Derek was receiving strange phone calls that made him very nervous, and several times I heard him talking about the boss can't know about this. Do you think he was taking orders from someone?" "I think so," said Emily, "and I think that someone might be closer than we imagine." Michael stood up and started pacing back and forth, as he always did when he was worried. Emily smiled, recognizing the habit he had before the accident. "Emily," he said, "did you keep the photos of the documents you found?" "I did," she confirmed. "They're at my apartment. Do you want me to go get them?" "Let's go together," said Michael. "I want to see everything." An hour later, they were at the small apartment where Emily had lived for the last 3 years. It was simple but cozy. Michael looked around and felt a pang of sadness. "You lived here alone all these years," he said. "I wasn't alone," replied Emily. "You were with me every day right here," she said, touching her heart. Michael hugged and kissed her. "You'll never have to live away from me again." Emily went to a cabinet and took out a folder with several photos of documents. "There are over 200 photos," she said. "I took them over almost 2 years whenever I managed to be alone in Derek's office." Michael began examining the photos. As he looked through the documents, his expression grew increasingly serious. "Emily," he said after almost an hour of looking at the photos, "this is much worse than we imagined." "Why?" "These documents aren't just about money embezzlement," explained Michael. "They show a scheme to take complete control of the hotel. Look here," he said, pointing to a photo. "This is a purchase contract for the hotel at a price well below market value." Emily moved closer to get a better look. "But who would buy the hotel?" Michael examined the document more closely and turned pale. "I can't believe it," he murmured. "What is it?" "The buyer," said Michael with a trembling voice, "is my brother." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the clock on the wall. Emily couldn't process what she had just heard. "Your brother?" she asked. Richard? Michael nodded, still looking at the document. This explains a lot, he said. How Derek got access to confidential information, how he knew the system codes, how he managed to operate for so long without being discovered. Emily sat down, feeling dizzy. Michael, she said, if your brother is involved, this means your own family was conspiring against you. Not the whole family, said Michael quickly. My mother didn't know anything, I'm sure of that. She would never do this to me. But Richard was always jealous of me, admitted Michael. When my father left the hotel to both of us, he thought he should have gotten everything, since he was the oldest. But Dad knew he didn't have the skills to run the business. And when you had the accident, he saw an opportunity, completed Michael. If he could make me go bankrupt, he could buy my share for a symbolic price and take everything. Emily stood up and hugged Michael from behind. What are we going to do? She asked. First, we'll gather all the evidence, said Michael. Then, we'll confront Richard. Are you sure you want to do this? He's your family. Michael turned in Emily's arms. Emily, he said, you are my family. You are the most important person in my life. If someone tried to hurt us, family or not, they'll face the consequences. They spent the night organizing the evidence. Michael called Robert and asked him to come to the apartment. When Robert saw the documents, he was shocked. Mr. Reynolds, he said, with this evidence, we can not only recover the embezzled money, but also press criminal charges against everyone involved. Including my brother? Asked Michael. Including your brother, confirmed Robert. The next morning, Michael scheduled a meeting with Richard at the hotel. Richard arrived smiling as if nothing was happening. Michael, he said, hugging his brother, I heard you're recovering your memories. That's great. Richard, said Michael coldly, sit down. Richard noticed the tone of voice, and his expression changed. Did something happen? Michael placed a folder on the table between them. Open it, he said. Richard opened the folder and saw copies of all the documents Emily had photographed. His face lost all color. Michael, I can explain. Explain then, said Michael, crossing his arms. Richard stood up and started pacing back and forth. You don't understand, he said. After your accident, I thought you would never fully recover. I thought it would be better if I took control of the hotel to protect the family business. Protect by stealing? It wasn't stealing, shouted Richard. It was precaution. I was keeping the money for when you got better. That's a lie, said Michael calmly. You were conspiring to buy my share of the hotel for a fraction of its real value. Richard stopped pacing and looked directly at Michael. And why not? He said angrily. You were always Daddy's favorite, always had everything handed to you. I worked as hard as you but never got the recognition. So you decided to sabotage me when I was most vulnerable. I decided to take what should have always been mine, shouted Richard. At that moment, the door opened and Emily entered, accompanied by Mrs. Patricia and 2 lawyers. Richard, said Mrs. Patricia, in a voice Michael had never heard before, how could you do this to your own brother? Richard looked at his mother and realized he had lost. Mother, he said. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, interrupted Mrs. Patricia. You took advantage of your brother's vulnerable state to try to steal everything from him. You even tried to destroy his marriage, keeping Emily away. I didn't keep anyone away. You knew she was working here, said Mrs. Patricia. I told you when I found out. And you asked me not to say anything to Michael because it might harm his recovery. Michael looked at his mother, then at Richard, then at Emily. The pieces finally fell into place. You knew, said Michael to Richard. All along you knew Emily was here being humiliated by Derek, and you did nothing. Michael, you let my wife be mistreated because it suited your plans. Michael's shout echoed through the room. Richard stepped back, frightened by his brother's fury. I didn't think... You didn't think? Said Michael, stepping closer. You didn't think she was suffering? You didn't think I had the right to know my wife was there? Michael, said Emily softly, touching his arm, let me talk to him. Michael stepped away, still shaking with anger. Emily approached Richard. Richard, she said with a frightening calm, how long have you known me? 5 years, he murmured. 5 years, repeated Emily. 5 years being your sister-in-law. 5 years of family dinners, parties, conversations. Did you really think I deserved 3 years of humiliation just so you could steal from your brother? Richard couldn't look Emily in the eyes. You have children, Richard, she continued. How would you explain to them that their father stole from his own brother? How would you explain that you let their aunt be mistreated because it suited your plans? Enough, Richard said quietly. No, said Emily, it's not enough. Because you didn't just do this to me. You did this to all the employees who were mistreated by Derek. You knew he was a tyrant and you let him continue because it was part of your plan to sabotage the hotel. Richard finally raised his head, and Michael saw tears in his eyes. I didn't want things to get to this point, he said. But they did, said Michael. And now you'll face the consequences. One of the lawyers approached. Mr. Richard Reynolds, he said formally, you are hereby notified that you will be charged with forming an association to defraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy against a family business. We recommend you seek legal counsel. Richard looked around the room, at his mother, who looked at him with disappointment, at Michael, who looked at him with anger, at Emily, who looked at him with pity. Michael, he said with a broken voice, you're my brother. You can't do this to me. You stopped being my brother the moment you decided to betray me, Michael replied coldly. Richard left the room with his head down, accompanied by the lawyers. After he left, Mrs. Patricia approached Michael. My son, she said, I'm so sorry. If I had known... Mother, said Michael, hugging her, it's not your fault. Richard manipulated everyone. I should have noticed, said Mrs. Patricia. I should have been suspicious when he asked me not to tell about Emily. What matters is that we found out in time, said Emily, and now we can rebuild everything. It will be difficult, said Michael. We'll have to fire several employees who were involved in the scheme. We'll have to restructure the entire operation. But we'll manage, said Emily with conviction, because now we're together. During the following weeks, Michael and Emily worked tirelessly to rebuild the hotel. They fired all employees involved in the corruption scheme, hired new people, implemented new control systems, and most importantly, created a new culture of respect and dignity. Emily proved to be an exceptional manager. Her experience as a frontline employee had given her a unique perspective on workers' needs and system flaws. We need to create a direct communication channel between employees and management, she said during a meeting, so that no one else gets mistreated without us knowing. That's a good idea, agreed Michael. What else do you suggest? A training program for supervisors on respectful leadership and an anonymous evaluation system for bosses by their subordinates. Robert, who had become an important ally, nodded approvingly. These are excellent ideas, he said, and they'll prevent situations like Derek's from happening again. 3 months after the confrontation with Richard, the hotel was running better than ever. Revenue had increased, employee satisfaction was very high, and guests constantly praised the service. We did it, Michael said one evening as they walked through the hotel's penthouse, which they had turned into their new home. Did what? Asked Emily, snuggling into his arm. Everything, said Michael. We recovered the hotel, our life, our love. We created something better than what we had before. You're right, said Emily. But do you know what makes me happiest? What? That you've become yourself again. Not just with the memories, but with the personality. Your way of leading, of taking care of people, of being fair. That wasn't lost, it was just dormant. Michael stopped walking and looked at her. Emily, he said, without you I would have lost everything. Not just the memories, but my very essence. You saved me in every way possible. We saved each other, she replied. Love did that for us. They were interrupted by the arrival of Jessica, who had now been promoted to general manager. Excuse me, she said, but there's a situation downstairs that you need to know about. What happened? Asked Michael, concerned. Derek is at the front desk, said Jessica. He wants to speak with you. Michael and Emily exchanged looks. Is he alone? Asked Emily. He is, confirmed Jessica, and he seems different. They went down to the lobby and found Derek sitting in one of the armchairs. He really was different. Thinner, dressed in simple clothes with a humble expression they had never seen before. "Michael," said Derek, standing up when he saw them. "Emily, thank you for seeing me." "What do you want?" asked Michael coldly. "To ask for forgiveness," Derek said simply. Emily was surprised that wasn't the answer they expected. "Forgiveness?" repeated Michael. "You stole millions, humiliated my wife, created a toxic environment at my hotel, and now you want forgiveness." "I know I don't deserve it," said Derek, "and I know you have no reason to forgive me, but I needed to try." "Why?" asked Emily. "Why is it important to you?" Derek took a deep breath before answering. "Because in the last few months since I lost everything, I've learned what it means to be treated with contempt. I've learned what it's like to be humiliated, to be considered less important, to be mistreated by people who have power over you." He paused and looked directly at Emily. "And I learned that you didn't deserve a single second of what I did to you. No one does." Emily felt her eyes fill with tears, not from sadness, but from relief. Finally, the person who had hurt her so much was acknowledging his wrongs. "Derek," she said, "why did you treat me so badly? What did I do to deserve that?" "Nothing," admitted Derek. "You never did anything. I treated you badly because I could, because you were too kind to defend yourself, because I knew you wouldn't complain." "And did that give you pleasure?" asked Michael. "At first I thought it was just business," said Derek, "maintaining discipline, demanding results. But later, it became something personal. I was frustrated with my own life, with my own failures, and I took it out on you." Emily took a step forward. "Derek," she said, "I forgive you." Michael turned to her, surprised. "Emily, I forgive you," she repeated to Derek. "Because holding on to anger won't change what happened, and because you had the courage to come here and admit your mistakes." Derek began to cry. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much." "But," Emily said firmly, "that doesn't mean there won't be consequences. You will still face the legal repercussions for your actions." "I know," said Derek, "and I accept that. But I needed you to know that I've changed, that I understand how wrong I was." Michael watched the scene and felt a mixture of pride and admiration for his wife. She had found the strength to forgive the person who had hurt her the most. "Derek," said Michael, "are you working?" "I'm trying," replied Derek, "but it's difficult." "No one wants to hire someone who was fired for dishonesty." Michael looked at Emily, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "If you've truly changed," said Michael, "perhaps we can give you a second chance. Not here, of course, but I can recommend you for a job somewhere else. A simple, honest job where you can start over." Derek looked at them with an expression of total disbelief. You would do that for me? After everything?" "Everyone deserves a second chance," said Emily. "As long as it's a real chance to change." A week later, Derek started working as a cleaning assistant at a public school. It was a simple job, but a dignified one. And for the first time in a long time, he treated people with respect and kindness. End of story. Now tell us, what did you think of Michael and Emily's story? Do you believe true love can overcome any obstacle? Leave your opinion in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and especially subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one.